Victoria Bennett stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her walk-in wardrobe, her trembling fingers running along the silk of her designer dress. The fabric, once a perfect fit, now strained slightly at the seams, a silent testament to the changes her body had undergone over the past few months. Outside the window of their Surrey mansion, rain peppered against the glass, matching the steady drip of tears she'd been fighting to hold back all morning. Still trying to squeeze into that old thing? Alexander's voice cut through the room, like ice. Her husband of 3 years leaned against the doorframe, his expertly tailored suit highlighting his athletic frame. He took a sip from his morning coffee, his wedding ring catching the light as he raised the cup to his lips. "I told Francesca we'd attend her charity gala next week. Do try to find something more suitable by then." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Victoria's reflection blurred as she blinked back fresh tears, her hands instinctively moving to her stomach. 3 years ago, she had been London's rising star in public relations, known for her quick wit and striking presence. Now, at 32, she found herself trapped in a gilded cage, every meal scrutinized, every outfit criticized. "I've been feeling rather unwell lately," she ventured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps we should skip the gala this time." Alexander's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Unwell? Is that what we're calling it now?" He crossed the room, his Italian, leather shoes silent against the plush carpet. Standing behind her, he placed his hands on her shoulders, his grip firm. "When I married you, Victoria, you were the epitome of perfection. Now look at you. Do you think my clients want to see their premier property developer's wife looking like she's let herself go?" Victoria's chest tightened, her breathing shallow. She remembered their wedding day, how he had called her his flawless diamond. Now, 3 years later, every extra pound felt like a personal betrayal in his eyes. The daily weigh-ins, the careful monitoring of her meals, the subtle comments that had gradually become cruel barbs. It had all become her new normal. "I've scheduled an appointment with Dr. Richards," Alexander continued, straightening his tie in the mirror. "He's got an excellent reputation for helping women regain their figure, top nutritionist in Harley Street." He paused, his grey eyes meeting hers in the reflection. "I expect you to take this seriously, Victoria. My position demands certain standards." Later that morning, Victoria sat in their pristine kitchen, staring at her untouched green smoothie. The house staff moved quietly around her, trained to be invisible in the face of domestic tension. Through the window, she could see their manicured gardens, every hedge perfectly trimmed, every flower exactly where it should be, just like everything else in Alexander's world. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. "Dr. Richards, 2 p.m. tomorrow, don't be late." Victoria's hand moved again to her stomach, where a secret was growing, one that would change everything. 2 weeks ago, she had discovered she was pregnant. The knowledge sat like a stone in her chest, heavy with implications. Alexander had always been clear about children. They would have them when he decided the time was right, when it wouldn't interfere with their social calendar or her figure. She thought about the future stretching before her, a lifetime of scrutiny, of trying to mold herself into Alexander's vision of perfection. Now, with a child on the way, the stakes were infinitely higher. Would he monitor their child's appearance with the same ruthless attention? Would their daughter, if it was a girl, grow up feeling the same crushing pressure to maintain impossible standards? The thought made her stomach turn. Rising from the kitchen table, she walked to the window, watching as the gardeners meticulously trimmed the rose bushes. Each snip of their shears echoed in her mind, reflecting the way Alexander had systematically cut away at her confidence, her joy, her sense of self. That evening, as she sat at her vanity preparing for another social engagement, Victoria made a decision. She wouldn't subject her child to this environment of constant criticism and conditional love. She had built a successful career before meeting Alexander. She could do it again. The woman staring back at her from the mirror might have lost some of her confidence, but beneath the carefully applied makeup and designer clothes, a spark of determination began to glow. Opening her laptop, she began to plan. Her personal accounts, still maintained separately from Alexander's, held enough to start fresh. Her old contacts in the PR world might still remember the bright, capable woman she had been. Most importantly, she had something Alexander had never truly valued: resilience. As she heard Alexander's footsteps approaching their bedroom, Victoria quickly closed her laptop. Tomorrow would bring another round of criticism, another series of subtle and not-so-subtle jabs at her appearance. But tomorrow would also bring something else, the first step towards her freedom. The morning sun had barely risen over the Surrey hills when Victoria quietly closed the door to the mansion that had been her prison for the past 3 years. Her single suitcase contained only essentials: clothes, documents, and a few cherished photographs from her life before Alexander. The rest she left behind: the designer wardrobe, the jewelry, the trappings of wealth that had slowly become chains. She had chosen her moment carefully. Alexander was away in Dubai, negotiating another luxury property development. The household staff wouldn't arrive for another hour. In her hand, she clutched a letter, not of explanation or apology, but of goodbye. She had considered leaving without a word, but some part of her needed him to know that she had chosen to leave, that she hadn't simply vanished. The taxi waited at the end of the long driveway, its ordinary presence a stark contrast to the fleet of luxury vehicles in Alexander's garage. As Victoria settled into the back seat, she gave the driver an address in London, not her final destination, but the first step in her carefully planned journey. "Long journey ahead, miss?" the driver asked kindly, noticing her pale face in the rearview mirror. Victoria managed a small smile. "Longer than you know," she replied, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. The first hints of morning sickness were beginning to stir, but with them came a surge of determination. Every wave of nausea was a reminder of the precious secret she carried, the future she needed to protect. Her first stop was a small cafe in Notting Hill, one she had frequented in her PR days. As she sipped her ginger tea, Victoria powered up her old work phone, which she had kept charged but silent for years. Scrolling through her contacts, she found the name she was looking for: Sarah Matthews, her former university roommate and now a successful wellness coach. "Victoria," Sarah's voice was warm with surprise. "I've been thinking about you. Are you all right?" The concern in her friend's voice made Victoria's carefully maintained composure crack. "I need your help, Sarah," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm starting over." Within hours, Victoria was sitting in Sarah's cozy flat in Brighton, a world away from the cold perfection of her Surrey mansion. Sarah listened without judgment as Victoria shared everything: the controlling behavior, the criticism, the pregnancy, the escape. "You can stay here as long as you need," Sarah said firmly, squeezing Victoria's hand. "But knowing you, you've already got a plan forming." Victoria nodded, pulling out her notebook. During the sleepless nights of the past 2 weeks, she had done more than just plan her escape. She had researched, studied, and dreamed up something new. "I want to help people, Sarah," she explained, her voice growing stronger. "Not just with their physical health, but their whole well-being. All those years with Alexander showed me how toxic our relationship with our bodies can become." Sarah's eyes lit up. "You know, I've been working with clients who struggle with exactly that. There's a huge need for a more comprehensive approach to wellness." She paused, thinking. "Have you considered studying nutrition, combined with your PR background and personal experience?" The rest of the afternoon passed in a flurry of ideas and possibilities. Victoria's PR expertise had taught her how to build brands and connections. Sarah's experience in wellness coaching provided insights into what people truly needed. Together, they began to sketch out the framework for something bigger than either of them had imagined. As evening fell, Victoria stood at Sarah's kitchen window, watching the sun set over the English Channel. The sea air felt different here, fresh, full of possibility. Her phone had been buzzing periodically throughout the day, Alexander's staff, discovering her absence. Then Alexander himself, his messages growing increasingly demanding. She turned off the phone without reading them. Tomorrow she would change her number. Tomorrow she would begin enrolling in nutrition courses. Tomorrow she would start building a new life for herself and her unborn child. But tonight, for the first time in years, she would sleep without wondering if she was taking up too much space in the world. "Tea?" Sarah appeared beside her, offering a steaming mug. "Chamomile," Good for the baby." Victoria accepted the cup gratefully, breathing in the soothing aroma. "I never thought I could do this," she admitted quietly. "Leave everything behind." Sarah smiled, wrapping an arm around her friend's shoulders. "You're not leaving everything behind," she corrected gently. "You're moving forward. There's a difference." As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. She had no illusions about the challenges ahead: being a single mother, building a new career, healing from the emotional wounds of her marriage. But for the first time, she felt equal to those challenges. In her mind, she began composing a different kind of letter to Alexander, one she would never send but needed to write in her heart. It wasn't an apology or an explanation, but a thank you. Thank you for showing her exactly what she didn't want to be. Thank you for pushing her to the point where she had to choose between surviving and living. Thank you for giving her the ultimate reason to leave, the child growing inside her, who deserved a mother who was whole, strong, and free. 5 years had passed since Victoria's departure from the mansion in Surrey. The Brighton morning was crisp and clear as she walked through the doors of Whole Self, her newly expanded wellness centre. The building, a beautifully restored Victorian structure near the seafront, housed not just a nutrition clinic, but a comprehensive wellness sanctuary. The reception area hummed with quiet energy as clients arrived for their morning sessions. Victoria paused to straighten a vase of fresh flowers, catching her reflection in the window. At 37, she radiated a confidence that no designer dress could have given her. Her body, strong and healthy, had carried and delivered a beautiful daughter, and now carried her through long days of helping others find their own path to wellness. "Mummy!" a small voice called out as a whirlwind of energy burst from the centre's child-friendly waiting area. Emily, now 4.5, wrapped her arms around Victoria's legs. With her father's striking grey eyes and her mother's warm smile, she was a perfect blend of both parents, though Alexander had no idea she existed. "Good morning, sunshine," Victoria smiled, kneeling to embrace her daughter. "Have you been helping Miss Sarah with the morning schedule?" Sarah, who had become not just Victoria's best friend but her business partner, appeared with a tablet in hand. "She's been quite the professional assistant," Sarah winked, "though she may have promised all our clients extra biscuits with their tea." Victoria laughed, a sound that came easily now. The centre's waiting room walls displayed framed articles and accolades. Revolutionary approach to wellness, Brighton's leading wellness innovation, transforming lives, the Whole Self method. Each one represented a milestone in Victoria's journey from broken wife to empowered entrepreneur. The morning's first client was a young woman whose story struck painfully close to home. Jennifer sat nervously in the consultation room, twisting her wedding ring. "My husband, he means well," she began, echoing words Victoria had once told herself. "But he's always commenting on my weight, my clothes, my appearance." Victoria listened intently, her own experiences allowing her to hear the pain beneath the carefully chosen words. Over the years, she had developed a program that went far beyond simple nutrition advice. It addressed the emotional and psychological aspects of self-worth, helping clients break free from toxic relationships with both food and people who undermine their confidence. "You know," Victoria said gently, "healing isn't just about changing your body. It's about changing the voice in your head, the one that might sound suspiciously like someone else's." As she guided Jennifer through the initial consultation, Victoria's mind drifted momentarily to Emily's upcoming school interview. The prestigious Brighton Preparatory School had an excellent reputation, and Victoria had worked hard to ensure her daughter would have every opportunity. Yet she was determined that Emily would grow up valuing herself for more than her appearance or achievements. Later that afternoon, during a rare quiet moment, Victoria reviewed the centre's latest initiative, a foundation providing support for women leaving controlling relationships. The irony wasn't lost on her that her experiences with Alexander had led her to create something that now helped others escape similar situations. Sarah popped her head in, interrupting Victoria's thoughts. "The magazine crew will be here tomorrow for the feature piece," she reminded her. "Are you sure you're ready for this level of publicity? There's a chance he might see it." Victoria nodded slowly. The upcoming article in a leading wellness magazine would put her story and her success in the national spotlight. She had carefully controlled her public profile over the years, but the foundation needed the exposure to reach more women in need. "It's time," Victoria said firmly. "Besides, we're not just telling my story. We're telling the story of every woman who's ever felt trapped by someone else's expectations." As if on cue, Emily darted into the office, her school bag trailing behind her. Victoria's heart swelled as she watched her daughter immediately gravitate to the small yoga mat they kept in the corner, naturally imitating the stretches she'd seen the instructors perform. "Mummy, Miss Sarah said you're going to be in a magazine," Emily said, attempting a wobbly tree pose. "Can I be in it too?" Victoria exchanged a glance with Sarah. They had prepared for this moment, knowing that increased publicity would require careful protection of Emily's privacy. "Sweetheart, remember how we talked about keeping some special things just for us?" Emily nodded sagely, dropping her pose to climb onto her mother's lap. "Like how Daddy doesn't know about me because he wasn't nice to you." Victoria hugged her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Exactly, love. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is keep ourselves safe and happy." As the afternoon sun streamed through the office windows, Victoria reviewed the final draft of her interview responses. She had chosen her words carefully, never naming Alexander, but sharing enough of her journey to inspire others. The article would focus on her innovative approach to wellness, combining nutrition science with emotional healing. The center's last client of the day was leaving, her face noticeably brighter than when she had arrived. Victoria watched from her office as the woman hugged Sarah goodbye, reminded of her own first days of freedom. Each success story, each woman who rediscovered her worth, felt like a personal victory. Emily had fallen asleep on the office sofa, her favorite book about brave princesses still clutched in her small hands. Victoria covered her with a soft blanket, marveling at how this little person had given her the strength to build something so meaningful from the ashes of her past. "Ready for tomorrow?" Sarah asked quietly, watching her friend with knowing eyes. Victoria smiled, her fingers tracing the embossed logo on the magazine brief. "Ready," she replied. "It's time to help more women write their own endings." Alexander Bennett stood at the window of his penthouse office in Mayfair, London's evening lights twinkling below like scattered diamonds. At 42, he remained an imposing figure in the property development world, his success measured in the gleaming towers that now punctuated London's skyline. Yet something had changed in the years since Victoria's departure, a subtle shift in his carefully constructed world. His reflection in the window showed a man still at the peak of physical perfection, maintained through rigid discipline and daily workouts. His current wife, international model Sofia Kovac, had been featured in his latest development's advertising campaign, their picture-perfect marriage a selling point for the luxury lifestyle he promoted. "Mr. Bennett?" His assistant's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mrs. Bennett is on line 1. She's asking about the charity gala next week." Alexander suppressed a sigh. Sophia, his wife of 8 months, was his third marriage since Victoria. Each relationship had followed a similar pattern: a whirlwind courtship, a lavish wedding, and then the slow erosion of initial attraction as his need for control emerged. "Tell her I'll call back," he replied, turning back to the window. The truth was, he had been avoiding Sophia lately. She had begun to ask questions about his past marriages, sparked by rumors circulating in their social circle. His phone buzzed with a message from his public relations team. They had forwarded a preview of an upcoming magazine feature on wellness innovations. Alexander almost dismissed it until a familiar smile caught his eye. Victoria's face, older, but somehow more radiant, looked back at him from the article's header. His fingers tightened on the phone as he read. The article praised her revolutionary approach to wellness and her successful chain of centers along the South Coast. There was no mention of him, no reference to their marriage, but he recognized hints of their story in her carefully worded responses about helping women rebuild their lives. "Your 3 o'clock is here, sir," his assistant announced. "The investors from Dubai." Alexander straightened his tie, pushing thoughts of Victoria aside. He had a reputation to maintain, deals to close. Yet, throughout the meeting, his mind kept drifting to the article. Victoria had built something meaningful, something that helped people. His own success, measured in steel and glass, suddenly felt hollow in comparison. That evening, as he sat alone in his penthouse, Sophia was at a fashion shoot in Paris. Alexander found himself searching online for more information about Victoria's wellness centers. The website was everything his developments weren't: warm, inviting, focused on inner transformation rather than external perfection. A photo gallery showed Victoria with her team, conducting workshops and consultations. She looked different from the woman he had married, not just physically, but in her presence. The controlled, anxious look he remembered had been replaced by genuine confidence. His phone rang again. This time it was his younger sister, Catherine. "I saw the article about Victoria," she said without preamble. "Did you know she's been helping Julia?" Alexander froze. Julia, his niece, had struggled with self-image issues for years. "What are you talking about?" "Julia's been attending sessions at her Brighton Centre for the past month," Catherine explained. "She says it's completely changed her life. The way Victoria's team approaches wellness, it's not just about food or exercise. They're helping Julia understand her worth isn't tied to her appearance." The irony struck him like a physical blow. His ex-wife was helping his niece overcome the very issues he had once perpetuated. Catherine's voice softened. "You know, Alec, Julia says Victoria's different from how you described her. She's strong, compassionate, nothing like the weak, unstable woman you painted her as." After ending the call, Alexander poured himself a drink, his hand slightly unsteady. The magazine article lay open on his desk, Victoria's words seeming to mock his chosen path. "True transformation begins when we stop trying to fit into others' expectations and start honoring our authentic selves." A text from Sophia lit up his phone. "We need to talk when I return, about us, about everything." Alexander recognized the tone. It was the same one Victoria had used in her goodbye letter, the same one his second wife had used in her divorce filing. History was repeating itself, yet this time he couldn't blame anyone but himself. His gaze fell on a framed photo from a recent property launch. He stood front and center, surrounded by beautiful people in expensive clothes, everyone smiling perfectly for the cameras. Yet looking at it now, all he could see was the emptiness behind the smiles, the fragility of relationships built on appearance and control. The night deepened around him as he sat in his office, the city lights below offering no comfort. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly consider the pattern of his relationships, the wreckage he had left in his wake. Victoria hadn't just escaped him, she had transformed her pain into purpose, while he had simply rebuilt the same gilded cage with different occupants. His phone buzzed one final time that evening, another message from his PR team. The Wellness magazine feature was generating significant social media attention. Victoria's story was resonating with people across the country, her centers becoming symbols of transformation and empowerment. Alexander closed the article, but Victoria's words remained with him. "Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from those who cannot see your worth." He had never understood her worth, not really. Now she was helping others discover theirs, while he remained trapped in the prison of his own making. The television studio buzzed with pre-show energy as Victoria sat in the makeup chair, her heart racing despite her outward calm. In the 5 years since opening her first wellness center, she had given countless presentations and interviews, but this was different. Morning Britain had a national audience of millions. "3 minutes, Mrs. Harrison," a production assistant called out, using the surname Victoria had adopted after leaving Alexander, her grandmother's maiden name. Sarah appeared at her side, squeezing her shoulder supportively. "Remember, you're not just telling your story," she said softly. "You're telling theirs." She nodded toward a stack of letters on Victoria's dressing table, messages from women whose lives had been transformed by the whole self centers. The interview began smoothly, with Victoria discussing the philosophy behind her wellness approach. The host, Emma Carlton, was warm and engaging, drawing out the details of how Victoria had built her successful chain of centers. "What inspired You to take this particular approach to wellness? Emma asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. Victoria took a breath, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest gifts to others. I experienced firsthand how devastating it can be when your worth is tied to your appearance, when someone makes you feel less than because you don't fit their ideal image. As she spoke, the studio monitors showed clips of her centers, of women finding strength and support in their programs. The camera caught the passionate light in Victoria's eyes as she continued, "We're not just about nutrition or exercise. We're about helping people rebuild their relationship with themselves." In his London office, Alexander sat frozen before his television, watching his ex-wife speak words that cut straight to his core. His current wife, Sophia, had left for Milan. The previous week, her parting words echoing Victoria's message about self-worth and toxic relationships. The interview shifted to discuss Victoria's latest initiative, a foundation providing support for women leaving controlling relationships. "We're opening our first residential facility next month," she explained, her voice strong and clear. "Her safe place where women can heal and rebuild their lives. And this is all funded through your wellness centers?" Emma asked, clearly impressed. "Yes, along with some remarkable corporate partnerships." Victoria smiled. "We've found that many businesses are eager to support genuine social change." In the green room, Emily sat with Sarah, watching her mother on the monitor. At 5 years old, she was already showing signs of both her parents' determination, but tempered with Victoria's newfound wisdom about self-worth. The interview reached its conclusion, but not before Emma made an announcement that caused Victoria's heart to skip a beat. "And we're thrilled to announce that Mrs. Harrison has been nominated for the National Wellness Innovation Award. The ceremony will be broadcast live next month." Back in his office, Alexander reached for his phone, dialing his sister Catherine's number. "Did you know about this nomination?" he demanded without preamble. "Of course," Catherine replied calmly. "Julia's been volunteering at the Brighton Centre. She's thriving there, Alec. Victoria's created something extraordinary." The conversation with his sister left Alexander unsettled. He found himself scanning through old photos on his phone, stopping at ones from his marriage to Victoria. How had he not seen the fear in her eyes, the way she seemed to shrink in his presence? Meanwhile, in the television studio, Victoria gathered her things, her hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline ebbed. The interview had gone well, perhaps too well. She had managed to keep Emily out of the public eye for 5 years, but increased visibility meant increased risk. "Mummy, you were brilliant!" Emily burst into the dressing room, throwing herself into Victoria's arms. Victoria held her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, strawberry shampoo mixed with the faint trace of chocolate biscuits. Sarah followed, holding Victoria's phone. "It's already trending on social media," she reported. "The Foundation's website is overwhelmed with messages of support." As they left the studio, Victoria's thoughts turned to the upcoming award ceremony. It would be the largest public event she'd attended since leaving Alexander. The risk of him being there was significant. Property developers often sponsored such functions. Back at their Brighton home that evening, Victoria sat in their cozy living room, watching Emily draw pictures of brave ladies, as she called the women at the centres. The little girl had inherited her father's artistic talent, her drawings showing remarkable detail for her age. "Mummy," Emily looked up suddenly, her grey eyes so like Alexander's, serious. "Why was everyone so excited about your television talk?" Victoria patted the sofa beside her, and Emily scrambled up, curling into her side. "Well, sweetheart, sometimes when you try to help people, others notice and want to help too. It means we can help even more people. Like the new house you're building for the sad ladies?" Emily asked, referring to the residential facility in her 5-year-old terms. "Exactly like that," Victoria smiled, smoothing her daughter's dark hair. "And you know what? Every time we help someone, it's like throwing a tiny stone into a big pond. The ripples spread out and touch people we might never even meet." Later that night, after Emily was asleep, Victoria sat at her desk reviewing the Foundation's latest reports. The residential facility was her most ambitious project yet, and the most personal. She had designed it to be everything she had needed when she left Alexander: a safe haven, a place to heal, a launching pad for a new life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Catherine, Alexander's sister. "Saw you on TV. You were amazing. Julia." "Can't stop talking about the centers. We need to talk soon." Victoria stared at the message, her finger hovering over the reply button. Catherine had been kind to her during her marriage to Alexander, but they hadn't spoken since she left. The thought of reconnecting filled her with both hope and apprehension. As she got ready for bed, Victoria caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the one who had fled Surrey 5 years ago. She was stronger now, not just in body but in spirit. Yet as she thought about the upcoming award ceremony, a familiar flutter of anxiety stirred in her stomach. The spotlight she had carefully avoided was now squarely upon her, and with it came the possibility of confronting the past she had left behind. As she checked on Emily one last time before bed, Victoria reminded herself that every choice she had made, every risk she had taken, had been for the sleeping child before her, and for all the women who needed to know they too could break free and build something beautiful from the pieces of their past. The invitation to the National Wellness Innovation Awards sat on Alexander's desk like an accusation. As a major property developer, his company had automatically received tickets to the prestigious event. In previous years, he had sent representatives or simply donated the tickets to business associates. This year was different. Sophia's divorce papers had arrived that morning. His third marriage had lasted barely 10 months, making it the shortest yet. Her reasons echoed those of his previous wives: controlling behavior, impossible standards, emotional manipulation. The patterns Victoria had spoken about on television were there in black and white, impossible to ignore. "Sir," his assistant's voice interrupted his thoughts. "The board is asking about the awards ceremony. They think it would be good publicity to attend, especially given the current situation." The situation was the subtle shift in public opinion following Sophia's very public departure. Whispers about his personal life were beginning to affect business relationships. Several potential investors had quietly withdrawn from discussions, citing concerns about company culture and values. In Brighton, Victoria was facing her own dilemma. The award ceremony would put her in the spotlight like never before, and with Emily starting school, timing was crucial. She sat in her office at the main centre, surrounded by the day's client files, each one representing a person seeking the very freedom she had fought to achieve. "The foundation needs this," Sarah reminded her gently. "Think of how many more women we could help with the publicity from winning." Victoria nodded, her fingers tracing the embossed invitation. "I know. It's just..." She glanced at the photo of Emily on her desk, taken at the beach last summer. "Everything's about to change, isn't it?" The weeks leading up to the ceremony passed in a blur of preparation. Victoria's centres continued to thrive, with waiting lists growing longer after her television appearance. The residential facility was nearing completion, its modern yet welcoming design a physical representation of her journey from survival to triumph. Emily, perceptive beyond her years, sensed the tension in her mother. "Are you worried about seeing him?" she asked one evening as Victoria tucked her into bed. Victoria froze, surprised by her daughter's intuition. "What makes you say that, sweetheart?" "I heard you and Aunt Sarah talking," Emily replied, hugging her favorite stuffed rabbit closer. "About my father being at the big party." Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, darling, being brave means facing the things that scare us, not because they can hurt us anymore, but because we're strong, enough to show others they can be brave too." Meanwhile, in London, Alexander found himself making unexpected changes. His sister Catherine's words about Julia's transformation at Victoria's centre had sparked something in him. He began seeing a therapist, though he told everyone it was just executive coaching. "Your pattern of control," his therapist noted. "During one session, it's not about their appearance at all, is it? It's about your own fear of imperfection, of losing control." The observation hit home harder than Alexander wanted to admit. He thought about Victoria's words in her television interview, about rebuilding relationships with oneself. For the first time, he began to question not just his actions, but the beliefs that drove them. As the award ceremony approached, both Victoria and Alexander made preparations, unaware they were about to cross paths for the first time in 5 years. Victoria chose a dress that represented her journey, elegant but comfortable, designed for a woman who valued herself. Alexander declined his usual +1 invitation, deciding to attend alone. The night before the ceremony, Victoria sat with Emily in their garden, their special place for important conversations. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day," she explained. "I might meet someone who was very important in my past." Emily, playing with a dandelion, looked thoughtful. "Is it okay to be scared sometimes, Mummy? Even when you're grown up?" Victoria pulled her daughter close, marveling at her wisdom. "It's absolutely okay. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right, even when you are scared." In his penthouse, Alexander stood before his window, looking out at the London skyline he had helped shape. The building stood tall and perfect, yet somehow empty. Victoria had built something far more meaningful, a legacy of healing and hope. His phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. "Will you be at the ceremony tomorrow? Julia's going with Victoria's team. Maybe it's time for some healing all around." Alexander stared at the message for a long time, thinking about patterns and choices, about the possibility of change. The man who had once demanded perfection from everyone around him was beginning to understand that true strength lay in acknowledging one's flaws. As both Victoria and Alexander prepared for the ceremony, neither could have predicted how their paths would intersect, or how the secrets of the past would finally come to light. The stage was set for a reunion that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. The grand ballroom at the Savoy Hotel glittered with promise as guests arrived for the National Wellness Innovation Awards. Victoria stood just outside the entrance, taking a moment to steady her nerves. Her team from the Brighton Centre surrounded her, their excited chatter providing a comfortable buffer against the evening's uncertainties. "You look radiant," Sarah whispered, adjusting the sleeve of Victoria's midnight blue gown. The dress, like everything about Victoria now, spoke of quiet confidence rather than a need to impress. "Emily wanted me to give you this," she pressed, a small paper heart into Victoria's hand, decorated with a child's drawing of a crown and the words, "Best Mummy Winner." Inside the ballroom, Alexander arrived early, choosing a seat that offered a clear view of the stage while remaining partially hidden by one of the room's elegant columns. He had dressed with his usual precision in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but tonight the armor of perfection felt less secure. "Uncle Alec?" Julia's voice startled him. His niece stood before him, looking healthy and confident in a way he had never seen before. At 16, she carried herself with a natural grace that had nothing to do with the strict standards he had once praised in others. "Are you here to support Victoria's Centre?" Before he could respond, the evening's proceedings began. Victoria and her team were seated at a table near the front, her presence drawing admiring glances and whispered conversations. The host began introducing the nominees for various categories, building toward the Innovation Award. "The whole self approach has revolutionized how we think about wellness," the host announced, as clips from Victoria's centers played on large screens around the room. By addressing both physical and emotional health, Mrs. Harrison and her team have created a model that Alexander barely heard the rest of the introduction. His attention was fixed on Victoria, seeing her truly for the first time in 5 years. She had changed in ways he was only beginning to understand. The nervous energy she had carried during their marriage had been replaced by something more substantial, a quiet strength that drew others to her. As Victoria took the stage to accept her award, her voice clear and passionate, Alexander noticed something that made his heart stop. A small gesture she made while speaking, pushing her hair behind her ear. It was exactly the same gesture he had seen countless times in business meetings, a habit he had inherited from his father. His mind raced back to the television interview, to glimpses of her centers in the media. Had there been signs he had missed? Children in the background of photos, carefully blurred or positioned away from the cameras. Victoria's acceptance speech focused on the future, the new residential facility, expanded programs, corporate partnerships. But it was her closing words that struck Alexander to his core. True healing begins when we stop hiding from our past and start building a better future, not just for ourselves but for the next generation. During the dinner that followed, Alexander found himself drawn into conversation with Julia and Catherine. His sister watched him carefully as Julia shared stories about her volunteer work at the Brighton Centre. "There's this little girl who sometimes comes in after school," Julia was saying. "She's absolutely brilliant at cheering up the clients. She reminds me of you, actually, Uncle Alec. She has this way of tilting her head when she's thinking, exactly like you do." Catherine's sharp intake of breath was almost imperceptible, but Alexander caught it. He turned to his sister, seeing her knowledge in her eyes that she had kept hidden. "Catherine," he said quietly, "how long have you known?" Before she could answer, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Sarah had rushed in, her face pale with concern. She made her way quickly to Victoria, whispering something urgent in her ear. Victoria's composed expression faltered. For just a moment before she excused herself from her table, Alexander watched as Victoria hurried from the ballroom, something about her rushed departure triggering an unfamiliar feeling of concern. Without fully understanding why, he found himself standing, moving to follow her. In the hotel's elegant lobby, he found Victoria on her phone, her voice tense. "I'll be right there, sweetheart. Mummy's coming. Just stay with Mrs. Parker until I arrive." She ended the call and turned, coming face to face with Alexander for the first time in 5 years. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and revelations hovering on the edge of discovery. "Victoria," he began, his voice rougher than he intended. "I can't do this right now," she interrupted, her composed facade cracking slightly. "Emily needs me." The name hung in the air between them. Emily. Alexander's mind raced, calculating dates, remembering Victoria's sudden departure, the changes in her appearance he had attributed to weight gain. "Emily," he repeated slowly. "She's..." Victoria met his gaze directly, years of protected secrets trembling on the edge of exposure. "My daughter," she said firmly. "She's my daughter and she needs me right now." But Alexander had already seen the truth in her eyes, in the familiar gestures he had noticed earlier, in Julia's casual observations. "How old is she?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Victoria clutched her award tighter, her knuckles white against the polished metal. "Alexander, please," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Not now. Not like this." The lobby's elegant clock chimed the hour, its sound emphasizing the weight of the moment. Both of them stood frozen, the past and present colliding in ways neither had expected, while somewhere across the city, a little girl with her father's grey eyes waited for her mother's return. The taxi ride to Brighton seemed endless as Victoria's mind raced with the implications of the evening's events. Emily had fallen ill at her friend's house. Nothing serious, just a childhood fever, but the timing couldn't have been worse. In the seat beside her, Sarah kept glancing at her phone, monitoring messages from Mrs. Parker, their trusted neighbor who was watching Emily. "He knows," Victoria whispered, more to herself than to Sarah. "Or at least, he suspects." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it. We always have." Back at the Savoy, Alexander sat in the hotel bar, his untouched whiskey growing warm as he scrolled through years of carefully curated press about Victoria's centres. There she was at the opening of the second location, a small, dark-haired child barely visible in the background. Another image showed her at a charity event, her body angled to shield someone small from the cameras. "She's exactly like you know," Catherine's voice interrupted his search. His sister slid into the chair opposite him, her expression a mixture of sympathy and determination. "Emily, she has your passion for art, your quick mind, but she has Victoria's heart, her capacity for kindness." Alexander looked up sharply. "You've known all along." "I found out by accident," Catherine admitted. "I saw them at a park in Brighton last year, before Julia started volunteering at the centre. Emily was drawing and she had that same look of concentration you get. I couldn't ignore the resemblance. In Brighton, Victoria arrived home to find Emily curled up on the sofa, her cheeks flushed with fever but her eyes bright. "Mummy, did you win?" Even ill, her daughter's first thought was for others. "I did, darling," Victoria smiled, pressing a cool hand to Emily's forehead. "But you're my most important prize." As she settled in beside her daughter, Victoria's phone buzzed with a message from Alexander. "We need to talk, not about the past but about her future, please." The next morning, Emily's fever had broken, but Victoria's anxiety remained high. She sat in her home office, staring at Alexander's message, while Emily drew pictures at her small desk in the corner. "Mummy, look!" Emily held up her latest creation, a drawing of the award ceremony as she imagined it, with Victoria on stage surrounded by stars and hearts. In the corner of the paper, almost as an afterthought, stood a figure that made Victoria's heart skip. A man in a suit, watching from behind a column. "Who's that, sweetheart?" Victoria asked carefully. Emily shrugged, adding more stars to the picture. "I saw him in the magazine with you and Aunt Julia. He looks sad sometimes, like the ladies at the center before they get better." Victoria's phone buzzed again. This time it was Catherine. "He's different now, Vic. The man you left wouldn't have gone to therapy. He wouldn't have questioned himself. Maybe it's time." Sarah arrived later that morning, bringing breakfast and her steady presence. As they watched Emily playing in the garden, Victoria shared Catherine's message. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked, knowing her friend's tendency to protect Emily fiercely. Victoria watched her daughter arranging stones in the garden meticulously, placing each one just so, another habit inherited from her father. "I'm thinking about what I tell our clients every day, that healing doesn't mean forgetting the past, it means learning from it." In London, Alexander sat in his therapist's office, their usual session time moved up by urgent request. "A daughter," he said, the word still foreign on his tongue. "I have a daughter who's been living less than 2 hours away, who I've never known because I made her mother feel so worthless, so unsafe that she had to hide the pregnancy from me." The therapist watched him carefully. "And how does that make you feel?" "Angry," Alexander admitted. "Not at Victoria, at myself. I've spent 5 years building towers, perfect structures of glass and steel, while she built something real. She protected our child from becoming another victim of my impossible standards." That afternoon, Victoria finally replied to Alexander's message. "Tomorrow, the Brighton Centre, 3 p.m. Emily has art class until 4, so we can talk privately first." As she sent the message, Victoria looked at the photo wall in her living room. Emily's whole life was documented there. First steps, first day of school, holidays at the beach. Alexander had missed it all, but she couldn't deny that her daughter carried pieces of him in her DNA, her determination, her artistic talent, her quick mind. Emily emerged from her room feeling better and carrying her sketchbook. "Can we go to the centre, Mummy? I want to show Miss Julia my new drawings." Victoria hugged her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Tomorrow? Sweetheart, we have something important to do tomorrow." As evening fell, Victoria sat in Emily's room watching her daughter sleep. The moon cast gentle shadows through the window, reminding her of another night 5 years ago when she had watched her newborn daughter and promised to give her a life filled with love and acceptance. Tomorrow would change everything, but as Victoria looked at her daughter's peaceful face, she knew that every choice, every secret, every careful step had led to this moment. The truth, so long protected, would finally emerge into the light, not as a weapon, but as a bridge between past and future. The Brighton Wellness Centre looked different in the afternoon light, its Victorian architecture softened by autumn sunshine. Victoria arrived early, walking through the quiet rooms where so many women had found their strength. Today she would need to find her own. Sarah had offered to stay, but Victoria knew this conversation needed to happen without buffers. She stood in her office, adjusting the photos on her desk. Emily's school portrait, a candid shot of them at the beach, her daughter's first art show ribbon. Each image represented a moment Alexander had missed, choices made in the wake of his cruelty. At precisely 3 o'clock, Alexander's distinctive figure appeared in the doorway. He looked somehow different from the night of the awards, less imposing, more human. His eyes swept the office, taking in the warm colors, the comfortable furniture, the wall of thank you cards from former clients. "Your receptionist remembered me," he said quietly. "From the magazines. She asked if I was here about the corporate, a wellness program." Victoria gestured to a chair, maintaining her professional composure. "We do offer those now. Major companies are finally recognizing the importance of emotional well-being." Alexander sat, his usual confidence notably absent, like the importance of recognizing toxic behavior patterns. His attempt at a smile faltered. "I've been seeing someone, a therapist. She's helping me understand why I treated you the way I did." Victoria's hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know. Catherine told me." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Through the window they could hear children playing in the park across the street, their laughter a reminder of what brought them here. "She has your eyes," Victoria finally said, "and your talent for art. She can spend hours drawing, getting every detail exactly right." Alexander's breath caught. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a carefully folded piece of paper, Julia's latest photo of Emily taken at the center. "Catherine says she's bright, that she helps out here sometimes, talking to the women who come for help. She has an old soul," Victoria nodded. "She understands more than most children her age. Last week she asked me why some people try to make others feel small to feel big themselves." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. Is that how she thinks of me? As someone who makes others feel small?" "She doesn't think of you at all," Victoria replied gently. "She knows she has a father, but I've never told her who you are or what happened between us. I wanted her to form her own identity, free from our past." Alexander stood abruptly, moving to the window. "Our past? You mean my cruelty, my obsession with perfection?" He turned back to face her. "Do you know what finally made me seek help? It was watching Julia transform at your center, seeing her become confident, happy in her own skin. I realized I'd spent years making the people closest to me feel exactly the opposite." Victoria watched him carefully, noting the genuine pain in his expression. "And now? What do you want now, Alexander?" "I want," he paused, choosing his words with uncharacteristic care. "I want to know her, not to control or to judge, but to know her. To understand this remarkable person who's half you and half me, but somehow entirely her own person." Before Victoria could respond, a commotion in the hallway caught their attention. Emily's voice, excited and clear, carried through the door. "Mummy, Miss Julia said you were here early. Look what I drew in art class today." Their eyes met in a moment of shared panic. Then Victoria made a decision. "Wait here," she said quietly, standing. "Let me talk to her first." In the hallway, Emily bounced. With excitement, her art folder clutched to her chest. Her dark hair was coming loose from its neat plait, and her grey eyes, Alexander's eyes, sparkled with creative enthusiasm. "Sweetheart," Victoria knelt to her daughter's level. "Do you remember what we've talked about your father?" Emily nodded solemnly. "That he wasn't ready to be a daddy when I was born, but that doesn't mean I'm not special." "That's right," Victoria smiled, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Well, sometimes people change. Sometimes they learn and grow, and they want to make things right." She took a deep breath. "Would you like to meet your father? He's here, and he would very much like to meet you." Emily's eyes widened. She clutched her art folder tighter. "Is he nice now?" Victoria's heart ached at the simple question. "He's trying to be. He's learning just like we all do at the center. But remember what I always tell you, that we don't have to do anything we're not ready for," Emily recited. "Exactly. This is your choice, sweetheart. We can walk away right now if you want to." Emily looked at her art folder, then back at her mother. "Is he the man from the magazine? The one who looks like me when he thinks?" Victoria nodded, amazed once again by her daughter's perceptiveness. "Can I show him my drawing?" Emily asked. "The one I did today?" "If you want to." Emily squared her small shoulders, a gesture so like her father that Victoria's breath caught. I want to, she said firmly. Victoria stood taking her daughter's hand. Together they walked to the office door. She squeezed Emily's hand once, then opened the door to face whatever came next. Alexander turned from the window as the door opened, and his carefully constructed world shifted on its axis. There, holding Victoria's hand, stood a little girl, who was unmistakably his daughter. Emily's grey eyes, his eyes, met his with a directness that struck him to his core. "Hello," Emily said, her voice clear and confident. "I'm Emily Harrison. I did a drawing today. Would you like to see it?" Alexander found himself kneeling, bringing himself to her level, something the old Alexander would never have done for fear of creasing his bespoke suit. "I would love to see your drawing, Emily." Victoria moved to her desk, creating space for this moment while remaining protectively close. She watched as Emily opened her art folder with careful fingers, selecting a particular piece with the same precision Alexander used when reviewing architectural plans. "It's the center," Emily explained, holding out her drawing. "But I made it into a castle because Mummy says it's a safe place where people can become strong again." Alexander took the offered paper, his hands trembling slightly. The drawing was remarkably sophisticated for a 5-year-old. The proportions were good, the details careful. But it was the figures in the windows that caught his attention, women of different sizes and shapes, all wearing crowns. "Mummy says everyone deserves to feel like a queen in their own story," Emily continued, watching his reaction carefully. "Do you like drawing too?" "I do," Alexander managed, his voice rough with emotion. "I used to draw buildings, still do sometimes." "Really?" Emily's eyes lit up. "Could you show me how? Miss Julia says I need to work on my straight lines." Victoria watched the interaction, noting how Alexander's usual rigid posture had softened, how his responses to Emily were genuine rather than calculated. This was a side of him she had never seen during their marriage. "I'd like that," Alexander said carefully, looking to Victoria for permission. "If your mother agrees, perhaps we could arrange some drawing lessons." Emily turned to Victoria with hopeful eyes. "Could we, Mummy, just for drawing?" Victoria moved closer, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "We could try that." Starting slowly, the rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of drawings and careful conversations. Emily showed Alexander her favorite spot in the center's garden, where she often sat to sketch the flowers. He listened intently as she explained her artistic process, recognizing in her methodical approach his own attention to detail, but softened by Victoria's nurturing influence. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the center's wooden floors, Emily gathered her art supplies. "Will you come back?" she asked Alexander directly. "For drawing lessons?" Alexander looked at Victoria before responding. "If it's all right with your mother, I'd very much like to." After Emily left with Sarah for her scheduled swimming lesson, Victoria and Alexander sat in the growing twilight of her office. The energy between them had shifted, not erasing the past, but acknowledging the possibility of a different future. "She's extraordinary," Alexander said quietly. "You've done an amazing job with her, Victoria. She's confident, kind, talented, everything I should have helped you be when we were together." Victoria wrapped her arms around herself, a protective gesture. "I needed to break free from your influence to become who I am, and I needed to keep her safe from the kind of pressure you put on me." "I understand that now," he nodded. "The therapy, it's helping me see how my father's perfectionism shaped me, how I perpetuated that cycle of control and criticism." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I don't expect forgiveness, Victoria, but I would like the chance to know our daughter, on your terms, at your pace." Victoria studied him thoughtfully. "It won't be simple. Emily's whole world is built on trust and acceptance. I won't let anyone disrupt that, not even her father." "I understand," Alexander replied. "I'm willing to learn, to change. These centers you've built, the lives you've transformed, including our daughters, they've shown me what real strength looks like." As they discussed boundaries and possibilities, the last light of day painted the room in soft oranges and pinks. Outside, the sounds of the center winding down for the evening created a gentle backdrop to their conversation. "We'll start with drawing lessons," Victoria finally decided. Once a week here at the center where Emily feels safe, Sarah or I will always be present, and at the first sign of any controlling behavior, it stops. Alexander nodded, accepting. Her terms without argument, another sign of how much he had changed. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving me this chance, for raising her to be everything I should have been." As they prepared to leave, Emily's drawing still lay on Victoria's desk, the center reimagined as a castle, its windows filled with crowned figures finding their strength. It was, Victoria realized, a perfect symbol of their journey, a place where broken things could be rebuilt, where new stories could begin. Alexander paused at the door, looking back at the drawing. "She sees the world differently," he observed. "Not in terms of perfection or flaws, but in possibilities." "Yes," Victoria agreed softly. "That's exactly what I wanted for her. What I want for all the women who come here." As they parted ways in the autumn evening, both understood that this was not an ending but a beginning. The path ahead would require patience, understanding, and growth from all of them. But for the first time, that path seemed lit with hope rather than shadowed by fear. 6 months had passed since the first drawing lesson. The Brighton Wellness Centre's garden had transformed through winter into spring, much like the relationships of those who gathered there each Saturday afternoon. Emily sat at her special table, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration, as she worked on perspective lines, a skill Alexander was carefully teaching her. Victoria watched from her office window, noting how her daughter's artistic confidence had grown. Alexander had kept his word, maintaining professional boundaries and focusing solely on nurturing Emily's talent. Each lesson took place in the center's sunlit conservatory, where Sarah or Victoria could observe, while giving father and daughter space to bond over their shared passion. "She's got real talent," Sarah remarked, joining Victoria at the window. "And he's different with her, patient. Nothing like the man you described from your marriage." Indeed, Alexander had surprised them all. Gone was the imposing figure who demanded perfection. Instead, he praised Emily's efforts, encouraged her experiments, and taught her that mistakes were opportunities to learn. His weekly visits had expanded to include occasional art gallery trips, always with Victoria present, always focused on Emily's interests and comfort. The transformation extended beyond their Saturday sessions. Alexander had begun implementing significant changes in his property development company. The cold, imposing glass towers were giving way to more thoughtful designs that considered community well-being. His latest project included a wellness center designed with input from Victoria's team. "Look, Mummy," Emily bounced into the office, holding up her latest drawing. "Daddy showed me how to make buildings look real with vanishing points." Victoria smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. The word daddy had entered Emily's vocabulary naturally, about 3 months into their sessions. It had startled them all at first, but like everything else about Emily, it came with her own perfect timing and sincerity. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Victoria praised, genuinely impressed by the technical skill emerging in her daughter's work. "Why don't you show Sarah while I talk to your father for a moment?" Alexander stood in the doorway, his casual weekend attire a far cry from his former rigid suits. "She's getting better every week," he said softly. "Though I suspect her real talent lies in the way she adds those little details, the people in the windows, the stories she creates for each building." Victoria nodded, remembering how Emily had recently reimagined one of Alexander's commercial developments as a happiness hotel where sad people could stay until they felt better. The drawing had affected Alexander so deeply that he'd modified the actual building plans to include a community wellness space. "The foundation board meeting is next week," Victoria said, straightening some papers on her desk. "They're very interested in your proposal for integrated wellness spaces in new developments." The foundation had grown significantly over the past months, with Alexander's unexpected support, adding corporate partnerships that expanded their reach. His contribution wasn't just financial. He brought a developer's perspective to their residential programs, helping create spaces that promoted healing and growth. "Julia's interview went well," he added, watching Emily show Sarah the finer points of perspective drawing. She'll make an excellent youth coordinator for the new teen program. Their niece had blossomed in her role at the center, her own journey, becoming an inspiration for other young people struggling with self-image. The teen program had been her idea, a way to prevent the next generation from falling into the traps of toxic relationships and impossible standards. As the afternoon light softened, Emily gathered her art supplies with methodical care, a habit she'd inherited from both parents. "Can we have ice cream in the garden?" she asked, looking hopefully between her parents. These small moments of shared time had become precious to all of them. In the garden, sitting on benches near Emily's favorite flower bed, Victoria and Alexander watched their daughter carefully balancing her ice cream cone while adding details to her drawing. Other families from the center's weekend programs enjoyed the spring weather around them, creating a peaceful atmosphere that would have once seemed impossible in both their lives. "The residential facility opens next month," Victoria mentioned. Accepting the napkin Alexander offered as Emily's ice cream threatened to drip. "We're already fully booked for the first quarter." Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Catherine mentioned you're adding a children's art therapy room. Emily's influence?" "Partly," Victoria smiled. "She showed me how art can help express things that are hard to say in words. Many of our clients have children who need their own ways to heal." They watched as Emily abandoned her drawing to help a younger child who had dropped their ice cream, sharing her own cone without hesitation. It was moments like these that showed them both how their daughter had somehow inherited the best of them while developing her own beautiful spirit. "Thank you," Alexander said quietly, his eyes still on Emily. "Not just for these Saturdays, but for protecting her from who I used to be, for giving me the chance to become someone worthy of knowing her." Victoria studied his profile, seeing both the man who had once caused her so much pain and the father who was learning to love without conditions. "She taught me too," she replied, "that sometimes the bravest thing isn't walking away, it's giving people the chance to change." The opening of the new residential facility coincided with Emily's 6th birthday. The building, a harmonious blend of Alexander's architectural vision and Victoria's healing philosophy, stood as a testament to how far they had all come. Large windows filled the space with natural light, while thoughtfully designed communal areas provided both privacy and connection. Emily had insisted on having her birthday party there, wanting to share her special day with the families who would soon call it home. The garden courtyard had been transformed with fairy lights and children's artwork, including a special exhibition of pieces created during the center's family art therapy sessions. "Is everything ready for the surprise?" Sarah whispered to Victoria as they put final touches on the decorations. Victoria nodded, glancing at the large easel covered with a cloth. Emily's gift from Alexander wasn't just a drawing lesson this time, it was something much more meaningful. Guests began arriving, a mix of Emily's school friends, families from the center, and their extended support network. Julia, now officially the center's youth coordinator, organized games that had children and adults laughing together. The sound of joy echoing through the courtyard was exactly what Victoria had envisioned for this space. Alexander arrived carrying a portfolio of drawings, architectural plans that Emily had helped design over their Saturday sessions. Together, they had reimagined the cold corporate buildings of his past into spaces that nurtured community and healing. The latest project, still under wraps, was their most ambitious collaboration yet. "Ready for the big reveal?" he asked Emily, who bounced excitedly in her party dress. She had grown taller over the past year, but it was her confidence that had truly blossomed. Every Saturday lesson with her father had built not just artistic skill, but trust and understanding. Victoria gathered everyone around as Alexander unveiled the easel. There, rendered in professional architectural style, but with unmistakable touches of Emily's artistic flair, were the plans for Emily's Place, a new wing of the residential facility dedicated specifically to children's healing through art. "Oh, you helped design this," Alexander explained to their wide-eyed daughter. "All those drawings you made, the stories you told about helping other children feel better, they're becoming real." Emily stared at the plans, recognizing elements from her own sketches transformed into actual architectural features. The reading nook she had imagined, the art studio with windows tall enough for rainbows, the garden designed for both play and peace, all there in precise detail. "Really?" she whispered, looking between her parents. "My drawings helped make this." Victoria knelt beside her daughter. "Your drawings, your heart, your way of seeing the world, they've helped all of us see things differently. This place will help so many children, sweetheart, just like you've helped us." The guests gathered around, admiring the plans. Julia pointed out how the design incorporated suggestions from their teen program. Sarah noted the practical elements that would make it both beautiful and functional. But it was Catherine's comment that brought tears to Victoria's eyes. "Look at what you've created," she said, embracing her sister-in-law. "Not just this building, but this family. You turned pain into purpose, and in doing so, you helped Alexander become the father Emily deserves." As the party continued around them, Victoria watched Emily showing her friends the details of the plans, her grey eyes, so like her father's, sparkling with excitement. Alexander stood nearby, answering technical questions from other parents, but always keeping his daughter in sight, his expression soft with pride and love. Later, as twilight painted the sky in gentle pinks and purples, the small family stood together in what would become the art therapy room of Emily's place. Emily had fallen asleep on a window seat, her new sketchbook clutched to her chest. "I never thought we'd be here," Victoria admitted quietly. "A year ago I was terrified of you discovering her existence. Now look at us." Alexander gently adjusted the blanket around Emily's shoulders. "You built something remarkable, Victoria. Not just these centers, but a way of helping people transform, including me." "We all did," Victoria corrected, watching their sleeping daughter. "Every woman who found her strength here, every family that healed, every lesson Emily taught us about unconditional love, we built this together." Through the windows, they could see the lights of Brighton twinkling against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, women were gathering the courage to seek help, to break free from toxic relationships, to rebuild their lives. And here, in this room that would soon welcome children on their own healing journeys, a family had found its own path to wholeness. Emily stirred slightly, mumbling something about drawing rainbows. Victoria and Alexander shared a smile, remembering the frightened woman and controlling man they had once been. Their daughter had indeed brought rainbows into their lives, painting over the grey of past hurts with colours of hope and renewal. As they prepared to wake Emily and head home, Victoria caught sight of their reflection in the window. Mother, father and child, each changed by their journey, each contributing to something larger than themselves. It wasn't the ending she had imagined when she fled that mansion in Surrey, but it was better. It was real, imperfect and beautiful in its own way. Just like the drawings Emily created each Saturday, their story had become something unexpected. A masterpiece built from mistakes and corrections, from shadows and light, from the courage to imagine something better and the patience to let it unfold in its own perfect time.